Welcome to a special Halloween episode of Cryptids and Cold Ones. We attempted to record this the last time we were recording, and yours truly forgot to hit record. So here I am, by myself. Hopefully everyone enjoys it. Our first story is called My Husband Has Discovered Something Awful. My husband woke me up from a nap with a gentle shake. I said, suppressing a yawn. What was that? I need to show you something, Brad said, his voice trembling. Now? It can't wait. Brad helped me off the couch and led me upstairs to the guest bedroom. Inside, a collection of weapons were strewn across the bed. A butcher knife, an aluminum bat from Brad's short stint playing rec ball, a handheld crossbow, and most notably, a plate of snickerdoodles. Brad, what the hell is going on? I gestured to the tiny arsenal. I have to show you. You won't believe me otherwise. Brad walked across the room and opened the curtains. It was a beautiful day, but too hot for October. Our neighbors across the street were outside. Mrs. Snyder was watering her flowers. Even though they'd all been dead, they'll all be dead in a month. Mr. Snyder was sitting on the porch drinking a tall glass of pink lemonade. Stay right here until I get back. Brad grabbed the knife and left. A few moments later, he was walking briskly across the street to the Snyders. Mrs. Snyder stopped watering her flowers to wave. Brad pulled out the knife and slashed her throat so ferociously that it looked like her head was about to come off. Oh, God, I uttered. Mr. Snyder ran to defend his wife, but Brad stabbed him 6 times in the blink of an eye and was already halfway home by the time Mr. Snyder hit the ground. I couldn't believe how gruesome it was. Brad burst back into the guest bedroom, covered in blood. 46, 47. Brad, I whimpered. Why did you do that? Brad pushed me away from the windows and shut the curtains. 52, he muttered. 53. Talk to me, I cried. 57, Brad said and flung the curtains open. Outside, Mrs. Snyder was watering her flowers. Mr. Snyder was drinking his lemonade. All the blood had vanished. Even the knife was back on the bed. There's something wrong here, Brad said, more to himself than to me. It doesn't matter how they die. After 57 seconds, they come back. They don't remember dying. I realized what Brad was saying. You've killed them more than once, I asked. I had to. I have to figure out what's going on. Brad, I interrupted him. Have you killed me? What? No, I would never. Thank God, I said, then grabbed the crossbow and shot Brad in the Adam's apple. He looked at me with terror in his eyes, then died, and I started counting. 7, 8. I quickly dragged Brad downstairs to the couch. 33, 34. When he reset, I wanted him to think he'd woke up from a nap. 49. I can't have Brad learning the rules of this place. 57. It's too dangerous. Honey? Brad said, opening his eyes. I had a horrible dream, but for the life of me, I can't remember what happened. I'm sure it was nothing, I smiled. second story is called The Pumpkin Patch. All right, Noah, my dad said. It's time you learned how to work the field. Do I have to? My dad had inherited the pumpkin farm from his father, who had inherited it from his father, and so on, going back to the 1800s when our family first settled the land. He wanted me to take over the farm one day, but I had no desire to do that. I planned to leave as soon as I turned 18, which was only 5 years away. Yes, you do, he snapped. Now get in the truck. Fine. I got in and slammed the door. He climbed in beside me, and we drove to the pumpkin patch in silence. Here. My dad handed me a pitchfork and a spray bottle after I'd gotten out of the truck. What am I supposed to do with these? Follow me, and I'll show you, he motioned. He walked over to the nearest pumpkin, sprayed it with his bottle, and then stared at it for a minute before moving on to the next one. He sprayed half a dozen pumpkins like that before I interrupted him. What is the point in this? I'm trying to show you, he replied. Just wait. He continued spraying pumpkins until I interrupted him again. What's in this? I held up the bottle. It's a ferrous iron solution, he replied. Why are you spraying it on the pumpkins? He sprayed another pumpkin. When the solution hit it, the orange flesh of the gourd turned black and began to smoke. That's why, he pointed. He dropped the spray bottle and held his pitchfork in a two-handed grip. Get ready, he warned. The roots of the affected pumpkin erupted out of the ground, and the face of the jack-o'-lantern, lit by an eerie green glow, appeared on its ribbed surface. What the hell is that? I dropped my spray bottle and readied my pitchfork as the monstrous pumpkin charged at us. That is a jack-o'-lantern, my dad said. A real one. The jack-o'-lantern launched himself at my dad, but he was ready for it. With one swift motion, he threw his pitchfork, spearing it in midair. The jack-o'-lantern released an unearthly squeal as it fell to the ground, where it turned to mush. This used to be a fairy glen, my dad explained as he retrieved his pitchfork and spray bottle. The old magic of the place still permeates the ground and sometimes gets into the pumpkins. If I hadn't seen the jack-o'-lantern with my own eyes, I would have thought he was pulling my leg. It's our job to weed them out and make sure that they don't go make it into someone's doorstep. What happens if they do? Remember those boys that were mauled by that dog? Yeah, it was anything anyone talked about for months. It wasn't a dog that mauled them. Those boys made the mistake of stealing one of our pumpkins before I had a chance to weed out the bad ones. Our third story is that of Hachisako-sama, otherwise known as 8 feet tall. 8 feet tall, or Hachisako-sama, is a Japanese urban legend about a tall woman who abducts children. She is 8 feet tall, wears a long white dress, and makes a sound like pope, 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 pope. My grandparents lived in Japan. Every summer, my parents would take me there on holiday to visit them. They lived in a small village, and they had a big backyard. I loved to play there during the summer. When we arrived, my grandparents always welcomed me with open arms. I was their only grandchild, so they spoiled me. The last time I saw them was the summer when I was 8 years old. As usual, my parents booked a flight to Japan, and we drove from the airport to my grandparents' house. They were delighted to see me, and had a lot of little presents to give me. My parents wanted to have some time by themselves, so after a few days, they took a trip to another part of Japan, leaving me in the care of my grandma and grandpa. One day, I was playing out in the backyard. My grandparents were inside the house. It was a hot summer's day, and I lay down on the grass to rest. I stared up at the clouds and enjoyed the feeling of the soft rays of the sun and the gentle breeze. Just as I was about to get up, I heard a strange sound. Po, 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 po. I didn't know what it was, and it was hard to figure out where it was coming from. It sounded almost like somebody was making the noise themselves, as if they were saying, po, 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 over and over again in a deep, masculine voice. I was looking around, searching for the source of the sound, when I suddenly noticed something on top of the tall hedges that enclosed the backyard. It was a straw hat. It wasn't resting on the hedge, it was behind it. That's where the sound was coming from. Po, 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 po. Then the hat began to move, as if someone was wearing it. The hat stopped at a small gap in the hedge, and I could see a face peering through. It was a woman, but the hedges were almost 8 feet tall. I was surprised at how tall the woman was. I wondered if she was wearing stilts or some sort of huge, high-heeled shoes. Then a split second later, she walked off, and the strange noise disappeared with her, fading into the distance. Bewildered, I got up and wandered back into the house. My grandparents were in the kitchen drinking tea. I sat down at the table, and after a while, I told my grandparents what I had seen. They weren't really paying attention to me until I mentioned that distinctive sound. Po, 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 po. As soon as I said that, both of them suddenly froze. Grandma's eyes grew wide, and she covered her mouth with her hand. Grandpa's face became very serious, and he grabbed me by the arm. "This is very important," he said, in an intense voice. "You must tell us exactly how tall was she." "As tall as the garden hedge," I replied, beginning to get scared. My grandfather bombarded me with questions. Where was she standing? When did this happen? What did you do? Did you see her? I tried to answer all of his questions as best as I could. He suddenly rushed out to the hallway and made a phone call. I couldn't hear what he was saying. I looked over at my grandma, and she was trembling. Grandpa came barging back into the room and spoke to my grandmother. "I've got to go out for a while," he said. "You stay here with the child. Don't take your eyes off of him for a second." "What's going on, Grandpa?" I cried. He looked at me with a sad expression in his eyes and said, "You've been liked by Hachisako-sama." With that, he hurried out, got into his truck, and drove off. I turned to my grandmother and cautiously asked, "Who's Hachisako-sama?" "Don't worry," she replied in a shaking voice. "Grandpa will do something. There's no need for you to worry." As we sat nervously in the kitchen waiting for my grandfather to come back, she explained what was happening. She told me that there was a dangerous thing that was haunting the area. They called it Hachisako-sama because of its height. In Japanese, Hachisako-sama means 8 feet tall. It takes on the appearance of an extremely tall woman, and it makes a sound like po, 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 in a deep male voice. It appears slightly different depending on who sees it. Some say it looks like a haggard old woman in a kimono, and others say It is a girl in a white funeral shroud. One thing that never changes is its height and the sound it makes. A long time ago, it was captured by monks, and they managed to confine it in a ruined building on the outskirts of the village. They trapped it using 4 small religious statues called yizos that they placed at the north, south, east, and west of the ruins, and it wasn't supposed to be able to move from there. Somehow it managed to escape. The last time it appeared was 15 years ago. My grandmother said that anyone who saw 8 feet tall was destined to die within a few days. It all sounded so crazy. I wasn't sure what to believe. When Grandpa came back, there was an old woman with him. She introduced herself as Keisan and handed me a small, crumpled piece of parchment, saying, "Here, take this and hold it." Then she and Grandpa went upstairs to do something. I was left alone in the kitchen with my grandmother again. I needed to go to the toilet. Granny followed me to the bathroom and wouldn't let me shut the door. I was beginning to get really frightened by all of this. After a while, Grandpa and Keisan took me upstairs and brought me into my bedroom. The windows were covered in newspaper, with lots of ancient ruins had been written on them. There were small bowls of salt in all 4 corners of the room, and a small Buddha figure at the center of the room on top of a wooden box. There was also a bright blue bucket. "What's the bucket for?" I asked. "That's for you to go to the bathroom," Grandpa replied. Keisan sat me down on the bed and said, "Soon the sun will be setting, so listen carefully. You must stay in this room until tomorrow morning. You must not come out under any circumstance until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Your grandmother and your grandfather will not speak to you or call you until then. Remember, do not leave the room for any reason until then. I will let your parents know what is going on." She spoke in such a grave tone that all I could do was quietly nod my head. "You have to follow Keisan's instructions to the letter," Grandpa told me. "And never let go of the parchment she gave you. And if anything happens, pray to Buddha. And make sure you lock this door when we leave." They walked out into the hallway, and after saying goodbye to them, I closed the bedroom door and locked it. I turned on the TV and tried to watch, but I was so nervous. I felt sick to my stomach. Grandma had left some snacks and rice balls for me, but I couldn't eat them. I felt like I was in prison, and I was very depressed and scared. I lay down on the bed and waited. Before I knew it, I was asleep. When I woke up, it was just after 1 a.m. All of a sudden, I realized that something was tapping on the window. Tap, 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 tap. I felt the blood draining from my face and my heart skipped a beat. I desperately tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks, or maybe the branches of a tree. I turned up the volume on the TV to drown out the tapping noise. Eventually, it stopped altogether. That was when I heard Grandpa calling me. "Are you okay in there?" he asked. "If you're scared, you don't have to stay in there all alone. I can come in and keep you company." I smiled and rushed over to open the door, but then I stopped in my tracks. I had goosebumps all over my body. It sounded like Grandpa's voice, but somehow it was different. I couldn't tell what was, but I just knew. "What are you doing?" Grandpa asked. "You can open the door now." I glanced to my left and a chill went down my spine. The salt bowls were slowly turning black. I backed away from the door. My whole body was trembling with fear. I fell to my knees in front of the Buddha statue and clutched the piece of parchment tightly in my hand. I started desperately praying for help. "Please save me from Hachisako-sama," I wailed. Then I heard a voice outside the door saying, "Po, po, 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 po." The tapping on the window started up again. I was overcome by fear and I crouched there in front of the statue, half crying and half praying for the rest of the night. It felt like it would never end, and eventually it was morning. The salt in all 4 bowls was pitch black. I checked my watch. It was 7:30 a.m. cautiously opened the door. Grandma and Kason were standing outside waiting for me. When she saw my face, Grandma burst into tears. "I'm so glad you're still alive," she said. I went downstairs and was surprised to see my father and mother sitting in the kitchen. Grandpa came in and said, "Hurry up, we've got to get going." We went to the front door, and there was a large black van waiting in the driveway. Several men from the village were standing around it, pointing at me and whispering, "That's the boy." The van was a 9-seater, and they put me in the middle, surrounded by 8 men. Kason was in the driver's seat. The man on my left looked down at me and said, "You've got yourself in quite a spot of trouble. I know you're probably worried. Just keep your head down and your eyes shut. We can't see it, but you can. Don't open your eyes until we've got you safely out of here." Grandpa drove in front, and my dad's car was following behind. When everyone was ready, our little convoy started moving. We were going fairly slow, around 20 kilometers, or maybe less. After a while, Kason said, "This is where it gets hard," and started muttering a prayer under her breath. That was when I heard the voice. "Pope, Pope, 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 Pope." I clutched the parchment Kason had given me tightly in my hand. I kept my head down, but I peeked outside. I saw a white dress fluttering in the breeze. It was moving along with the van. It was Hachisako-sama. She was outside the window, but she was keeping pace with us. Then suddenly she bent down and peered into the van. "No!" I gasped. The man beside me shouted, "Close your eyes." I immediately shut my eyes as hard as I could and tightened my grip on the piece of parchment. Then the tapping began. Tap, 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 tap. The voice began to get louder. Pope, 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 Pope. There was tapping on the windows all around us. All of the men in the van were startled and on edge, muttering nervously to themselves. They couldn't see 8 feet tall, and they couldn't hear her voice, but they could hear the tapping on the windows. Kason started praying louder and louder until she was almost shouting. The tension inside the van was unbearable. After a while, the tapping stopped, and the voice disappeared. Kason looked back at us and said, "I think we're safe now." All of the men around me breathed a sigh of relief. The van pulled over to the side of the road, and the men got out. They transferred me into my dad's car. My mother held me close, and tears were running down her cheeks. Grandpa and my father bowed to the men, and they went on their way. Kason came to the window and asked me to show her the piece of parchment she had given me. When I opened my hand, I saw that it had gone completely black. "I think you will be okay now," she said. "But to be sure, hold on to this for a while." She handed me a new piece of parchment. After that, we drove straight to the airport, and Grandpa saw us safely on the plane. When we took off, my parents breathed a sigh of relief. My father told me he had heard about 8 feet tall before. Years ago, his friend had been liked by her. The boy disappeared and was never seen again. My father said there were other people who had been liked by her and lived to tell about it. They all had to leave Japan and settle down in foreign countries. They were never able to go back to their homeland. She always chooses children as her victims. They say it's because children are dependent on their parents and other family members. This makes them easier to deceive when she poses as their relatives. He said the men in the van were all blood relatives of mine, and that's why they had been sitting all around me and why my father and Grandpa had been driving in front and back. It was all done to try and confuse Hachisako-sama. It took a while to contact everyone and get them all together, so that's why I had to be confined in a room all night. He told me that one of the little Yizo statues, the ones that were meant to keep her trapped, had been broken, and that was how she escaped. It gave me chills. I was glad when we finally got back home. All of this happened more than 10 years ago. I haven't seen my grandparents since then. I haven't been able to so much as set foot in the country. Afterwards, I would call them every few weeks and talk to them on the phone. Over the years, I tried to convince myself that it was just an urban legend, that everything that happened was just some elaborate prank. But sometimes I'm not so sure. My grandfather died 2 years ago. When he was sick, he wouldn't allow me to visit him, and he left strict instructions in his will that I wasn't allowed to attend his funeral. It was all very sad. My grandmother called me a few days ago. She said that she had been diagnosed with cancer. She missed me terribly and wanted to see me one last time before she died. "Are you sure, Grandma?" I asked. "Is it safe?" "It's been 10 years," she said. "All that happened a long time ago. It's all forgotten. You're all grown up now. I'm sure there won't be a problem. But what about Hachishako-sama?" I said. For a moment there was a silence on the other end of the phone. Then I heard a deep masculine voice saying, "Po, po, 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 po." And our final story will be one titled Harold, from my favorite book series as a child, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. When it got hot in the valley, Thomas and Alfred drove their cows up to a cool, green pasture in the mountains to graze. Usually they stayed there with the cows for 2 months. Then they brought them back down to the valley again. The work was easy enough, but oh, was it boring. All day the two men would tend to their cows. At night they went back to the tiny hut where they lived. They ate supper and worked in the garden and went to sleep. It was always the same. Then Thomas had an idea that changed everything. "Let's make a doll the size of a man," he said. "It would be fun to make, and we could put it in the garden and scare away the birds." "It should look like Harold," Alfred said. Harold was a farmer they both hated. They made the doll out of old sacks stuffed with straw. They gave it a pointy nose like Harold's and tiny eyes like his. Then they added dark hair and a twisted frown. Of course, they always gave it Harold's name. Each morning, on their way to the pasture, they tied Harold to a pole in the garden to scare away the birds. Each night, they brought him inside so that he wouldn't get ruined if it rained. When they were feeling playful, they would talk to him. One of them might say, "How are the vegetables growing today, Harold?" Then the other, making believe he was Harold, would answer in a crazy voice, "Very slowly." They both would laugh, but not Harold. Whenever something went wrong, they took it out on Harold. They would curse at him, even kick him or punch him. Sometimes one of them would take the food they were eating, which they were both sick of, and smear it on the doll's face. "How'd you like that stew, Harold?" he would ask. "Well, you'd better eat it or else." Then the two men would howl with laughter. One night, after Thomas had wiped Harold's face with food, Harold grunted. "Did you hear that?" Alfred asked. "It was Harold," Thomas said. "I was watching him when it happened. I can't believe it." "How could he grunt?" Harold asked. "He's just a sack of straw. It's not possible." "Let's throw him in the fire," said Thomas, "and that will be that." "Let's not do anything stupid," said Alfred. "We don't know what's going on. When we move the cows down, we'll leave them behind. For now, let's just keep an eye on him. So they left Harold sitting in a corner of the hut. They didn't talk to him or take him outside anymore. Now and then the doll grunted, but that was all. After a few days they decided there was nothing to be afraid of. Maybe a mouse or some insects had gotten inside Harold and were making these sounds. So Thomas and Alfred went back to their old ways. Each morning they put Harold out in the garden, and each night they brought him back into the hut. When they felt playful, they joked with him. When they felt mean, they treated him as badly as ever. Then, one night, Harold noticed something that frightened him. "Harold is growing," he said. "I was thinking the same thing," Thomas said. "Maybe it's just our imagination," Alfred replied. "We have been up here in this mountain too long." The next morning, while they were eating, Harold stood up and walked out of the hut. He climbed up on the roof and trotted back and forth like a horse on its hind legs. All day and all night he trotted like that. In the morning, Harold climbed down and stood in the far corner of the pasture. The men had no idea what he would do next. They were afraid. They decided to take the cows down into the valley that same day. When they left, Harold was nowhere in sight. They felt as if he had escaped a great danger and began joking and singing. But then they had gone only a mile or two. They realized they had forgotten to bring the milking stools. Neither one wanted to go back for them, but the stools would cost a lot to replace. "There really is nothing to be afraid of," they told one another. "After all, what could a doll do?" They drew straws to see which one would go back. It was Thomas. "I'll catch up with you," he said, and Alfred walked on toward the valley. When Alfred came to a rise in the path, he looked back after for Thomas. He did not see him anywhere, but he did see Harold. The doll was on the roof of the hut again. As Alfred watched, Harold kneeled and stretched out a bloody skin to dry in the sun. Thank you for joining me on our Halloween special. I hope everyone enjoyed the stories. I know I enjoyed reading them to you. All credit to the authors will be found in our show notes, as well as our Linktree for all of our socials. And don't forget that you can reach out to us at 989-402-4091 with your stories. Set up an interview. We are still looking for listener stories, experiences. We'd love to have you on the show so we can get your story out there to people. Thanks again.